Welcome to the 11th episode of Stories from the Last Territory, a podcast that covers the golden years of wrestling in Puerto Rico. My name is Luis Cuevas, better known as the Caveman, and I'm your host for this trip back in time to the greatest feuds in the history of Puerto Rico. If you like what you hear and see, please subscribe to YouTube and Desde los Territorios por Wrestling Dom or in audio at Spotify as Stories from the Last Territory. Today, we're going to be talking about one of the coolest mid-card feuds we had in the late 80s, the feud between the Caribbean Express tag team composed of Miguelito Perez and Huracán Castillo versus the Kansas Jayhawks team of Bobby Jaggers and Dandy Dan Crawford for the Caribbean tag team titles in 1988. That culminated with a hair versus hair match in Anniversary 88. This was a very interesting period for Capital Sports Promotion. Uh, this was a little bit after the time where Bruce Brody was murdering the island, so it was chaos. They were trying to figure out what they were going to do in the main event. All the plans had to be scrapped pretty much. The plans they had with Bruce Brody, with Invader One, with some of the other wrestlers that left and never came back. So it was a very weird time in Capital Sports Promotion. Like the main event of anniversary for that year originally was going to be a fire match between Abdullah the Butcher versus Carlos Colon out of nowhere, and Hercules Ayala defending the Universal title versus Ronnie Garvin. But this feud of the Caribbean Express versus the Kansas Jayhawks, and another feud like Ricky Santana versus Mr. Pogo, and some of the undercard and midcard feuds that they had running during that time help a lot. Capital Sports Promotion at least have a sense of continuity in a time of chaos until they figure out what they were going to do for the rest of the year, how they were going to figure out this this mess that was created in the night of June 18, 1988. So I like this field because I love tag team wrestling. First of all, I'm a big mark for it. I actually like tag team wrestling more when it's done right, more than singles wrestling. I don't know. I've always been like that. And so this field was kind of a few things, the bright spots that they had during this time while they figure out what they were going to do in the main event area and scene. They try a couple things. They turned Runstar, who have been one of the greatest heels, into a baby face. They were in chaos. Like every week was something different. And this feud and the Ricky Santana versus Mr. Pogo and some of the other feuds kind of like at least gave fans something to look forward to on a weekly basis until they figure out the mess that they had in the main event. Uh, the Kansas Jayhawks team that came to the island during that year was very different. Was not the original team that, as the original members that the American wrestling fans were used to. The original tag team of the Kansas Jayhawks, as everybody knows, was Bobby Jaggers and Dutch Mantel. They had wrestled in Jim Crockett Promotions, I believe, in '86, and also in Kansas City when Crockett bought Kansas City Wrestling. And this was not only this version was Bobby Jaggers and Dandy Dan Crawford, who, in my opinion, was a very, very underrated worker, and it was awesome in the ring, in my opinion. And this also was not the first time that Bobby Jaggers have come to the island. He had a previous run in '81, '82 that was really good, especially his feud against the Invader One that led to Invader One in TV unmasking himself. And they came to the island. They since their debut in the island in January 30 of 1988, the Kansas Jayhawks established themselves as a hell of a tag team. They had great feuds with the like of the Jump Blocks for the Caribbean tag team titles that saw them exchange the titles in a couple occasions. And then they faced my favorite tag team of all time. Well, the second one after the Midnight Express, the Rock and Roll Express of Robert Gibson and Ricky Morton that came to the island during that spring and summer of '88. And the matches against the Kansas Jayhawks were very, very good. There's a couple of them in YouTube that I highly recommend for the Caribbean tag team titles. And they had established themselves as great Caribbean tag team champions, and it seemed like no tag team could take them out of those titles for a while. On the other hand, uh, you had two of the three musketeers of the island. You had Miguelito Perez, who arguably was the best in-ring worker in the history of Puerto Rico, and you had who in that '88 had a little bit of resurgence as a wrestler. He had a great feud with the Super Black Ninja. He also had a great run as Puerto Rico heavyweight champion, and Huracan Castillo, who also had a little bit of a resurgence in that 88 after being kind of lost both of them in the show from 1987. Castillo had been feuding with El Profe and Gran Mendoza for the junior heavyweight title, and there's actually a pretty good scaffold match between them two. Considering scaffold matches are not the greatest, but this one was pretty good for being a scaffold match. But anyway, so they were joined together as a tag team. They had started doing on and off tag team since 1987. They were starting to be called the Caribbean Express, but it was in 1988 when they fully became full-time tag team partners, and they were really good. I enjoyed that tag team. It was a hell of a tag team. Miguelito Perez, he was more the high flyer and the technician of the team, and Castillo was more the brawler, the punch and kick guy of the team. And slowly but surely, they meshed together and they start climbing the ranks of the tag team division, and they became then finally they got a chance for the Caribbean tag team titles, which was the secondary tag team title of the island during that time after the World Tag Team titles. Uh, the match was set up for July 20 in the city of Catania during the TV tapings. And in that match, the Caribbean Express defeated the Kansas Jayhawks to become the number one contender for the Caribbean tag team titles. And that's when the chase really started, with the babyface team going after the title. They had the rematch on July 23, and in that match, it looked like Perez was going to pin Dan Crawford to win the titles when Bobby Jaggers interfered, threw Miguel Perez outside the third rope to cause the DQ. And the Jayhawks attacked Castillo and beat him up with a cast that Jaggers had been using during that time for that short period of time. They had another match, the rematch, on July 30 in Caguas, where again, and that match sadly is just clipped on the TV program. Miguelito Perez hit a beautiful power slam on Dan Crawford, but at the last second, Jaggers hit the ref to cost the DQ, and that seemed to be the story of the feud. Every time the Caribbean Express seemed to be winning the titles, Jaggers would do something to cost the DQ, or interfere, or do something to save the titles from the baby faces. A rematch was set then for the August 6th card in Iran Bison Stadium in Puerto Rico. In that promo to the match, Bobby Jaggers mentioned that this would be the last opportunity that the Caribbean Express will have for the tag team titles. And if they don't win it tonight, buddies, you're not going to get another title shot from us. And that night, the Jayhawks again caused a DQ to retain the titles when Jaggers, this time threw Castillo over the top rope in front of the ref to that win, retain the title. And that led to the next night in a house show. Castillo faced Dandy Dan Crawford in a single match. And again, Bobby Jaggers interfered and beat Castillo up with a cast, leaving him all bloody. Uh, and leaving him into Miguelito Perez made the save. In TV, Bobby Jaggers said, "This is it. You guys are not getting any more any more title chances. That you had your chance, you blew it, you didn't win it. No matter what happened, we're still the champs. You guys are not getting another title shot." So in a TV taping, the Jayhawks then signed a match to defend this title against this new tag team that was debuting in Puerto Rico called Los Vigilantes. The Vigilantes came out in Catania. They were all dressed in black, barefoot, with two wrestling masks, and they fought with the Jayhawks, who really looked like they were just going to ease to a win in that match when the Vigilantes surprised them and pinned them to win the tag team titles. And Catania was like booming. People were just crazy, like, because they couldn't believe what happened. And then they were even more surprised when they saw that the people behind the mask were none other than Castillo and Perez, who were wrestling under the mask and revealed themselves. And Bobby Jaggers started screaming. Dandy Crawford was surprised. Bobby Jaggers grabbed the mics and said, "Hey, we didn't sign to defend the titles against you two. We signed against the Vigilantes." And they complained to the commission. And the commission reversed the decision, saying that, yes, in fact, the contract said that they were going to face the Vigilantes, not Castillo and Perez. And they returned the titles back to Bobby Jaggers and Dandy Dan Crawford. This is a fun match. It's in the August 13th program of Armstrong Allen, his YouTube channel. And I think you could find it by itself. Castillo and Perez in mask and wrestling barefoot. It was pretty cool to see. And the reaction of the fans when they discovered that it was Castillo and Perez made it all worthwhile. We have seen that angle in many places, but it was pretty cool to see it in Puerto Rico, especially during that time. In TV, the Jayhawks again said, "We're never gonna get. They were never going to get another title shot. They were not going to give another title shot to the Caribbean Express, to the Boricuas. They will fight them all they want in an own title match, but nothing that had to do with the title." Caribbean Express, they wanted their revenge, so they signed for a match in August 13th, where the babyface on TV kept calling them cowards by not putting the titles in the line and saying that tonight they were going to push and shove and make sure that they pinned them so that way they had no other choice but to put the titles on the line. And that's what happened in August 13th. Miguelito Perez and Huracan Castillo pinned or defeated the Kansas Jayhawks to then become the number one contenders for the Caribbean Tag Team titles. And this time the commission said that if they didn't put the title on the line, they were going to lose the titles. So that led to a match and a TV tapings in Catania. In that match, which was surprising to see in a TV taping, but after what happened, then you go, oh, okay, they were setting up an angle for aniversario. In that match, the ref was knocked out, and Jaggers using the bullwhip took down Castillo and Miguelito Perez, and then proceed to take out of his bag a some scissors and a bag, and they start cutting both the hairs of Perez and Castillo in TV, and putting them in a plastic bag to carry to show the fans around that they had in one of those Zipco bags. In that, what continued to happen on TV, the rule breakers were showing the backs of hair, bragging, that hey, they wasted another opportunity. We're not going to defend the titles again with them. Just being gloating against them, humiliated by this and the fact that the Jayhawks were brandishing their hair in a bag. The babyface had requested a hair versus hair match for anniversary 88. And of course, the Jayhawks said, of course, we'll accept it, but as long as it's enough for the title. And the babyface, well, they had to accept, but again, with the condition that if they won, they will get their title shot again. And that became one of the main events of one of the occasions of Aniversario 88. That anniversary was going to be held in two stadiums. Juan Ramon Lobriel Stadium, a baseball park, and the Rubén Rodriguez Stadium in Bayamón, a basketball court that were both right next to each other. And both of them were filled to capacity, putting to rest the thing that after the bloody dead, Puerto Rico wrestling was dead. No, it took a while, but they finally got it back when they uh, figured out what they were going to do with the main event. And this match in Aniversario 88 was a great tag team match that I highly recommend you guys check out in YouTube. You saw both teams, the great chemistry they had. You saw the baby faces looking for vengeance, the rule breakers trying to survive and cheat their way out of the title. I mean, out of the with a win for to retain, their hair, and then finally Castillo surprised Crawford 1, 2, 3, and the baby faces won. They get their revenge. They cut Bobby Jaggers and Dandy Crawford hair, and that set up another series of matches, but this time for the tag team title because now the Jayhawks wanted revenge and they wanted to take out Miguelito Perez and Castillo. After this match, they had another couple of matches into finally in the last end of the year card in Bayamon, the Caribbean Express defeated the Kansas Jayhawks to win the Caribbean tag team titles. Finally, their first tag team title together. And after that, they had a great run for the next couple of years as probably the number one local tag team. They had great feuds with the Ninja Express, the Batten Twins that maybe we cover in another podcast. The Kansas Jayhawks, they stayed for a little while, but then they left the island. And the Caribbean Express will continue to be that number one tag team into 1991 when they split up and they had a great feud that we will cover in another podcast. But again, this field was great in the sense that it helped stabilize a little bit Capital Sports Promotion until they figure out what the hell they were going to do with the main event scene. They had lost Brody, they had lost Invader. They had to move a lot of pieces during that time after the death of Bruiser Brody. And this feud and some of the other undercard feuds helped them, keep bringing people until they figure out what they were going to do. And of course, as everybody know, in August they did the famous award ceremony where Hercules Ayala attacked Carlos Colon and his wife. That brought up the houses back up, and it led to the fire match. en Aniversario 88. That's why it's called Hot Night in Bayamon. And it also helped establish TNT and other the mid card feuds that they were going on, and it set up everything. But this feud and the Ricky Santana versus Pogo, you gotta give them credit that helped Capital during a hard time to at least have something stable that people can go and see while the main event scene was figured out and all the pieces were put into place. So I hope you guys enjoy this look at this mid-card feud of the 1988, the feud between Huracan Castillo and Miguel Perez versus the Kansas Jayhawks. Uh, Next week, we're going to come back with another great feud of the golden years of wrestling in Puerto Rico. I want to thank everybody for their support, for the number of subscriptions. They have really gone up in Spotify, and I'm really thankful that you guys have enjoyed and have loved this podcast into them. Into next week, like my great man that was Joaquin Padin Hijo used to say, sayonara, amigos.